During the American Civil War, it's believed that there were roughly 600,000 to over 1 million people who were killed. Ultimately, the Union defeated the Confederacy, but as with all conflicts, there were a number of war criminals who were responsible for suffering on a large scale. One such man who was executed for his involvement in the terrible conditions at Camp Sumter, a camp where he was a commandant of, was Henry Wirz. He was a Confederate States Army officer, and he was brought to the gallows in Washington, D.C., in front of a crowd of around 200 people. Join us today as we look at the brutal execution of Henry Wirz, and remember as always to support our channel. Please make sure to subscribe. Henry Wirz was born as Hartmann Heinrich Wirz on the 25th of November 1823 in Zurich, in Switzerland. His father was a master tailor, and he was well educated, and he dreamed of becoming a doctor. But his family could not afford to pay for a medical style of education, and because of this he was instead educated as a merchant, and he then also worked in a store in Zurich. He was a married man, and he had 2 children, but whilst in Switzerland, in 1847, he was sentenced to 4 years' imprisonment, as he was charged with fraud and embezzlement. But he was freed the following year, and he was then sent to 12 years of exile from the area he lived in. His wife during this time divorced him, and Henry travelled to Moscow before he then went to America, and he worked in a factory in Massachusetts. He then moved to Kentucky, and he worked as an assistant to a doctor, and he would perform small surgery and also cast broken bones. He also tried to open his own medical practice, and he remarried in 1854. Wirz then moved to Louisiana, but as the American Civil War broke out in 1861, Henry Wirz joined the conflict. He enlisted as a soldier in Company A of the 4th Battalion of Louisiana Infantry of the Confederate Army. He fought at the Battle of Seven Pines, and he served as an assistant to a high-ranking Confederate general, and he was wounded during the battle. When he recovered, he became a captain and was considered a skilled and brave soldier. But then he became part of General John H. Winder's staff, who was in charge of Confederate prisoner of war camps, and he became his assistant. It's believed also that he may have been dispatched to England and France to carry messages, but when he came back to America, he continued to serve as a prison commandant in Alabama. But in February 1864, the Confederates established Camp Sumter, a huge military prison near to a railroad depot in southwestern Georgia. This was built to house Union prisoners of war, and 2 months after it opened, Wirz arrived, and he was there for a year as the commandant. He was praised to begin with by many of his superiors, and some prisoners even admired him, but as more inmates came to Camp Sumter, the site was quickly overwhelmed. The huge transports of inmates led to suffering and overcrowding, and also poor sanitation, starvation, and a distinct lack of medical supplies. Wirz knew the conditions were not good enough, and he asked for more support from higher up, but this was denied, and he was not allowed anything. One inmate wrote of the camp, "As we entered the place, a spectacle met our eyes that almost froze our blood with horror, and made our hearts fail within us. Before us were forms that had once been active and erect, stalwart men, now nothing but mere walking skeletons, covered with filth and vermin. Many of our men, in the heat and intensity of their feeling, exclaimed with earnestness, 'Can this be hell? God protect us!' and all thought that he alone could bring them out alive from such a terrible place. In the centre of the whole was a swamp, occupying about 3 or 4 acres of the narrowed limits, and a part of this marshy place had been used by the prisoners as a sink, and excrement covered the ground, the centre rising from which was suffocating. The ground allotted to our 90 was near the edge of this plague spot, and how we were to live through the warm summer weather in the midst of such fearful surroundings was more than we cared to think of just then. The camp held around 32,000 Union prisoners, and around 3,000 people up to this each month were dying from disease, dysentery and no food. Around 13,000 inmates would die inside the camp. But Henry Wirz was arrested by the 4th US Cavalry on the 7th of March 1865 in Andersonville. He was taken to Washington, D.C., where he was imprisoned at the old Capitol Prison, and he was to be placed on trial for impairing the lives of Union prisoners of war. A special military tribunal and commission was gathered, and Wirz at this time was suffering from gangrene. The tribunal took place between August and October 1865, and he was charged with combining, confederating, and conspiring to injure the health and destroy the lives of soldiers in the military service of the United States, and then held as being prisoners of war within the lines of so-called Confederate states, and in this military prisons thereof, that the armies of the United States might be weakened and impaired in violation of the laws and customs of war. He was also charged with violation of the laws of war to impair and injure the health and to destroy the lives by subjecting to torture and great suffering, by confining in unhealthy and unwholesome quarters, by exposing to the inclemency of winter and to the dews and burning sun of summer, by compelling the use of impure water, by furnishing insufficient and unwholesome food of large numbers of federal prisoners. He was also personally accused of 13 murders and acts of cruelty, including shooting inmates, kicking victims, and forcing prisoners into the stocks, and also chaining inmates together. He was also accused of ordering executions and having dogs attack prisoners. There were 158 people who testified, some for Wirz's defence, but many actually witnessed Wirz's cruelty. In November 1865, he was found guilty of conspiracy as charged and was sentenced to death. He was acquitted of some charges, but he was, as mentioned, sentenced to death and to be executed. There were appeals for clemency that went as high as the US President, but this letter was ignored, and he did not get this. He was offered to be spared if he implicated others and high-ranking Confederate officials in the atrocities, but he would not do this. On the 10th of November 1865, Henry Wirz, who was guarded by 4 companies of soldiers, was led up to the gallows in the old Capitol prison yard. Around 250 spectators had received government-issued tickets, and they were watching on towards the gallows. He was led to the stairs, and then was led up them, and then the spectators screamed and shouted and chanted, "Remember Andersonville." A hood was then placed over his head by the executioner, and the rope was fastened around his neck. His last words were that he was being executed for simply following orders. But at 10:32 a.m. the trapdoor was released, and the rope stretched under Wirz's weight, and he was not killed by a broken neck, but instead he slowly strangled to death. The crowd cheered that he had died, as they had been made aware of the conditions of Andersonville, and many despised the condemned man, and the public wanted vengeance. Henry Wirz was a Commandant of Camp Sumter, who was executed because of the conditions that occurred there. He was a man who had been considered by some to have been a victim, and there were some people who criticised his death sentence, saying he was just following orders and was not personally responsible for the horrors of Camp Sumter and the awful conditions there. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.